Well, there's also been a reaction to the Pope's death on the federal election campaign trail today. CBC's Karina Roman is in Ottawa following that part of the story for us. Karina, the leaders are in, we know, their final push before Election Day in this country, but many taking the time to really reflect on the Pope's legacy. Take us through what they're telling us.
Well, let's start with Liberal leader Mark Carney, who obviously started his media availability today with a statement about the Pope's passing. But he wasn't just responding to it because it's significant news or even because he himself is a practicing Catholic. Mark Carney also has had several meetings and interactions with the Pope, things that he has mentioned in his book. And before he spoke on camera, he put out a statement that talked about some of that, including working alongside the Pope and the Pope's team through something called the Council for Inclusive Capitalism, which is about placing human dignity at the center of the economic and political system. He talks about a meeting at the Vatican in 2014 where Pope Francis issued a challenge, Mark Carney says, that has guided him ever since, which is that he likened humanity to wine and the market to grappa, saying we need to turn grappa back into wine and reintegrate human values into our economic lives. So Mark Carney speaking very much about his personal, the impact that Pope Francis had on him personally in terms of his views. At his news conference, though, he did also speak about it. So have a listen to what he had to say.
Pope Francis was a voice of moral clarity, spiritual courage, and boundless compassion. He was, in many respects, the world's conscience, never hesitating to challenge the powerful on behalf of the vulnerable. Above all, His Holiness understood and taught that value in the market must never eclipse the values of society. He wrote about the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, reminding us that ecological degradation and social injustice are deeply entwined. During his papal visit to Canada in 2022, his apology on residential schools was a crucial step in moving the Church forward in its journey towards meaningful reconciliation.
Now, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre also took the time off the top of his news conference to address the passing of Pope Francis, and he as well is as a Catholic, but also recognizing that the passing of Pope Francis impacts Catholics around the world. Have a listen.
Let me first offer my condolences to Catholics all around the world on the loss of Pope Francis. His role is, of course, at the center of the Catholic Church, and there have been countless millions of Catholics and non-Catholics that have been inspired by his leadership in faith and other domains, and our prayers are with all Catholics as they lay to rest the head of the Catholic Church, and we are in solidarity in remembering him and honoring his contributions.
And of course, Karina, other leaders taking time today to address the passing of Pope Francis. What are their reactions?
Well, for Indigenous peoples in Canada, this Pope was particularly significant, inviting them to the Vatican and then coming to Canada and issuing the apology. And this is something that NDP leader Jagmeet Singh focused on when he addressed the Pope's death. Have a listen.
I want to share my condolences on behalf of all New Democrats. If I could just share a personal reflection on Pope Francis, I was at the apology that the Pope did in Alberta to the Indigenous communities. I want to acknowledge the Indigenous communities and their long advocacy to get that apology. And it was a very powerful moment for many of the leaders that I met, many of the community members who talked about how hearing that apology from the Pope made them feel like they were taking a step forward on their healing journey. Just being acknowledged in that way, recognizing that a harm had happened and that harm was being acknowledged really was powerful. And I think only someone like Pope Francis was able and capable of making that commitment and fulfilling that apology. So I want to acknowledge that.
Interestingly, the Assembly of First Nations National Chief Cindy Woodhouse also earlier today was interviewed by CBC, in which she said that one thing that really impacted her was going to the Vatican and having the Pope listen to the stories of, and some of them very horrific stories of their time at residential schools, and how important it was that he did take the time to listen to their experiences before even making the apology. Now, Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François also addressing this on the campaign trail today and expressing his condolences. Have a listen.
Quebecers who are Catholics and Christians and who are attached to the institution or the person of the Pope. And I hope everyone will come through this with serenity. So I extend my condolences to all of those who've been affected by his passing.
Now, it's fair to say that this is not the first time that non-election news has made its way onto the election campaign trail. So this is something that the leaders are getting used to. And this, I think most people would accept, is not a one-day story, the Pope's passing. This is a significant development in international news and for people around the world. That said, this is the last week of the election campaign. It is the home stretch. It is often a sprint to the finish for leaders in terms of how many campaign stops they make, the kind of messages they're putting out, really trying to get out the vote. So even though they all took the time to address it today, I think most people can expect their attention to turn back to the campaign trail pretty immediately, if they haven't already, then tomorrow.
Yes, with, of course, voting day, April 28th. Thanks so much, Karina. CBC's Karina Roman in Ottawa. Well, the CBC's Richard Madden is tracking more reaction in the United States. Joining us now live from Washington. Richard, Pope Francis was at odds with the current U.S. administration on some issues, and yet Vice President JD Vance was among the last people to spend time with him yesterday. Talk to us a little bit more about the reaction that we're hearing today from the White House. Yeah,
first and foremost, those people we heard moments ago are from in New York, and Pope Francis visited New York 10 years ago on a rare trip to the United States, where he visited New York and Philadelphia, addressing Catholics there. So his legacy lives on in the Eastern Seaboard. Now, you mentioned JD Vance, the vice president, may have been one of the last people to attend Pope Francis's final Easter Sunday Mass at the Vatican Sunday. You mentioned this current administration has been at odds with the former pontiff, and that's an understatement. But this morning, we're seeing a bit more diplomacy. The White House has been issuing condolences, posting photographs of the president and the vice president posing with Pope Francis in their separate visits to the Vatican. And earlier, President Trump signed an executive order to pay tribute to the late pontiff. Take a listen.
I just signed an executive order putting the flags of our country, all of them, all federal flags and state flags, at half-mast in honor of Pope Francis. So he was a good man, worked hard, he loved the world, and it's an honor to do that.
Now, Vice President Vance, who became a devout Catholic 6 years ago, met with the Pope on Easter Sunday to celebrate the holiest day of the Christian calendar. And we saw in photos the Pope gave Vance's kids some candies to mark the service. We have another statement from former President Joe Biden. He, of course, is a strong practicing Catholic, posting, and I'm going to show it up here, Pope Francis will be remembered as one of the most consequential leaders of our time, and I am better for knowing him. Biden went on to say he commanded us to fight for peace and protect our planet from a climate crisis. He advocated for the voiceless and powerless. He made all feel welcome and seen by the church. He promoted equity and an end to poverty and suffering across the globe. And above all, he was a pope for everyone. Now, as for the vice president, he posted his own statement saying his heart goes out to the millions of Christians all over the world who loved him. He went on to say, I was happy to see him yesterday, though he was obviously very ill. Now, the White House says a presidential delegation may attend the funeral service at the Vatican, and also offered more condolences to Pope Francis. Watch.
No travel plans at this time. Doesn't mean it's not happening. I just don't have anything to share. But the president, of course, is aware of the passing of the Pope and did put out a statement this morning. And we're praying for the millions of Christians around the world who loved the Pope and admired him.
So some more diplomacy there from an administration that often clashed with the late Pope, especially over immigration policies and the treatment of migrants. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Pope's final Mass on Easter Sunday, he criticized the administration's policies on deportation. Vice President Vance was in attendance when the late Pope mentioned it. Now, in response, Vance described his brief meeting with the late Pope that day as a, quote, exchange of opinions, which really underscored the tensions between the White House and Pope Francis that continued to his final days.
Richard, tell us a little bit more about this relationship between the Pope and the Trump administration. As you mentioned, some at odds there.
Yeah, the pontiff had publicly criticized President Trump during his first term, saying Trump's plan to build a wall along the southern border was not Christian. Trump attacked him back, calling him disgraceful. And at the time, it felt jarring. Here you had a presidential candidate clashing with a pope, especially Donald Trump, where he was aggressively courting votes and endorsement from Christian conservatives. But these tensions would later become somewhat normalized. We've seen the Pope continue to attack the current White House in his final years over Trump's immigration policies and cuts to U.S. aid. And it was remarkable that back in February, the Pope wrote an open letter to the American Catholic bishops. There, he criticized Trump's deportation policies and his executive order that allows ICE agents to enter churches and schools to deport migrants. Here's how Vice President Vance fired back, questioning the motives of those Catholic bishops who endorsed the Pope's message. Listen.
As a practicing Catholic, I was actually heartbroken by that statement. And I think that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops needs to actually look in the mirror a little bit and recognize that when they receive over $100 million to help resettle illegal immigrants, are they worried about humanitarian concerns, or are they actually worried about their bottom line? We are going to enforce immigration law. We're going to protect the American people.
So in that letter, the late Pope described the administration's acts of deporting these migrants, that it damages the dignity of many men and women and of entire families and places them in a state of particular vulnerability and defenselessness. So in his final days, he appeared to be at odds with the administration on one of its key agenda items. So once again, you have a Pope that leaves behind a legacy of empathy and kindness, and the administration, of course, is going in a different direction than how the Pope would have hoped.
Thank you, Richard. The CBC's Richard Madden in Washington.